Hello, good morning, class 10th students. This is Naren Sharma, your English teacher. Today I am going to complete the remaining part of the very first chapter of Footprints Without Feet. This is my lecture number 3. Here I am on page number 3, third paragraph from bottom. Yesterday I completed up to the very paragraph just above it, up to ignored him. I made up a bed for him in a warm, loose box next to one where the other dogs slept. Now Mr. Harriet, the veterinary doctor, prepared a bed for Tricky in a warm, loose box that was kept to the place where other dogs were kept. Okay, for 2 days I kept an eye on him, giving him no food but plenty of water. As Tricky was suffering from the problem of malnutrition, in reality, Mrs. Bamfrey was providing him overdiet. The dog was overfed. यानी कि ट्रिकी जो कुत्ता था उसको उसकी मालकिन अत्यधिक लाड प्यार करती थी और वो उसे खाने के लिए आवश्यकता से अधिक यानी कि उसकी ओवर फीडिंग किया करती थी. सो देयर माइट बी द प्रॉब्लम ऑफ मेल न्यूट्रिशन. सो in order to provide treatment, Mr. Harriet gave no food to Tricky for 2 days. Simply, he kept on giving him extra amount of water. Plenty of water was given to Tricky. At the end of the second day, he started to show some interest in his surrounding, and on the third day, he began to whimper when he heard the dogs in the yard. Whimper means to cry in pain. Whimper means to cry in pain. Now what happened? After the end of the second day, the Tricky started to show some interest in his surrounding areas, in his fellow beings, means the other dogs. And on the third day, he started crying in pain when he heard the dog in the yard. Now you know it is the general tendency of the dogs. If one dog starts barking, the other dogs also join that particular dog. So same was the condition there. When I opened the door, I here stands for James Harriet, the veterinary doctor. When James Harriet opened the door, Tricky trotted out and was immediately engulfed by Joe, the greyhound, and his friends. Now, as soon as the door was opened by Mr. Harriet, Tricky just started moving out, and immediately Tricky was surrounded. Engulfed here means surrounded. Engulfed here means surrounded by Joe. That was the greyhound. Okay. And his friends. Other dogs were also there. All the dogs joined Tricky. They wanted to play with him. After rolling him over and thoroughly inspecting him, the dog moved off down the garden. Now, after making a round of Tricky, they just wanted to play with Tricky, and after giving a thorough inspection, here greyhound Joe found him, and other dogs also found Tricky that the dog was not of their interest. That's why the other dogs, they moved off down the garden. Tricky followed them. rolling slightly with his surplus fat. Now, Tricky wanted to play with those dogs. That's why Tricky started just chasing the other dogs. Okay, it started rolling or moving in a slow manner as he was having the deposit of surplus amount of fat over his body. Okay. Later that day, I was present at feeding time. I watched while Tristan stopped the food into the bowls. Okay. There was the usual headlong rush followed by sounds of high speed eating. Every dog knew that if he fell behind the others, he was liable to have some competition for the last part of his meal. Now, later on the very next day, when Harriet was present there, uh, on the time when the food was provided to those dogs. So, Harriet was, while other dogs, namely Joe and Tristan, they just uh, slopped the food into the bowls. Okay. Now, the caretaker of the dog, Mr. Tristan, was just spilting the or putting the food into the bowls that were kept there for the dogs. There was the usual headlong rush, followed by the sounds of high speed eating. Now there was a get rush. All the dogs they were hurriedly moving towards the bowls in order to uh, engulf the food, in order to take the food, along with high speed. They started taking the food uh, in high speed. Every dog knew that if he fell behind the others, he was liable to have some competition for the last part of his meal. It was known to each and every dog that if he remained behind, then it was likely to have some competition for getting the last part of his meal. तो बाद में अगले दिन जब वेटनरी डॉक्टर जेम्स हैरियट वहाँ पर उपस्थित था, जब उसने ट्रिस्टन जो केयर टेकर था डॉग्स का उसको बाउल के अंदर भोजन डालते हुए देखा, तो सारे कुत्ते जो थे वो उस भोजन को प्राप्त करने के लिए तेज़ी से बाउल्स की तरफ बढ़े और प्रत्येक कुत्ता इस बात से वाकिफ़ था कि यदि वो थोड़ा पीछे रह गया तो उसे भोजन के अंतिम भाग के लिए एक प्रकार से प्रतिस्पर्धा करनी पड़ेगी. When that finished, Tricky took a walk round the shining bowls, licking casually inside one or two of them. Next day, an extra bowl was put out for him, and I was pleased to see him jostling his way towards it. Jostling means pulling. So, when others' dog finished, Tricky, as you know, he was somewhat lazy due to the extra deposit of fat. Tricky took a walk round the shining bowl that were kept there containing some food stuff. Now Tricky started licking. Licking का मतलब चाटना. Casually inside one or two of them. Okay. So one or two bowls that were kept there were containing some food stuff. Tricky started licking that bowl. Next day, an extra bowl was put out for him. Now, on the very next day, James Harriet put another bowl that was only for Tricky. I was pleased to see him jostling his way towards it. James Harriet was extremely happy when he noticed that he was pulling himself towards the bowl in order to intake some food. From then on, his progress was rapid. After that day, Tricky started showing some development, some rapid progress. as far as its health was concerned. He had no medical treatment. Up to this time, no medical treatment was provided by Mr. Harriot to Tricky of any kind. But all day he ran about with the dogs, joining in their friendly scrimmages. Scrimmages means fights or the quarrel between the dogs. Now, in spite of no medical treatment, on the very next day, Harriet noticed that Tricky started running along with the other dogs, joining their friendly quarrel. He discovered the joy of being bowled over, tramped on, and squashed every few minutes. Now, later on, Mr. Harriet noticed that now Tricky started showing some interest in playing with those dogs. He was just crushing towards them, and he has already started taking the food after a few minutes. He became an accepted member of the gang, an unlikely silky little object among the shaggy crew, fighting like a tiger for his share at mealtime and hunting rats in the old hen house at night. Now, later on, Tricky uh, was accepted, was allowed to mix up in the company of other dogs. Ultimately, he joined the king. He joined the gang of the other dogs. It was somewhat unlikely as the dog was somewhat lazy, having extra deposit of fat, and his hairs were also shaggy, means rough hair. He started the joining the group of other dogs who used to fight like tiger to get the share of their food at the meal time. And the second activity, which was the most favorite one of all the dogs, they started hunting rats in the old hen house at night time. He had never had such a time in his life. Okay. Now, Tricky was not having such kind of life previously, as he was the pet of a rich lady. All the while, Mrs. Pembrey hovered anxiously in the background, ringing a dozen times a day for the latest bulletins. Now, here Mrs. Pembrey was very much worried about uh, his about her pet Tricky. She kept on hanging over here and there in a very worried and anxious manner in the background, and in the meantime he just started making calls to the veterinary doctor a dozen times in order to know about the latest health bulletin of Tricky. I dodged the questions about whether his cushions were being turned regularly or his correct coat worn according to the weather. But I was able to tell her that the little fellow was out of danger and convalescing rapidly. Convalescing means recovery from the illness. Convalescing means recovery from the illness. Now, in order to get the latest health bulletin of Tricky, Mrs. Pembrey kept on making calls a dozen times to the veterinary doctor, and doctor just make him some satisfied answer. He replied some satisfied answer when she asked whether the cushions were being turned regularly or whether his coat was worn according to the weather. The doctor gave answers accordingly that everything is fine here. All the arrangements are being made. But I was able to tell her that the little fellow was out of danger and conversing rapidly. Now, here Mr. Harrier told Mrs. Benfrey that the Tricky was now out of danger and he was recovering from his illness in a very rapid manner, in a fast manner. The word conversing seems to do something to do Mrs. Benfrey. Now, here, when she heard that the dog was recovering from illness, it appeared something like a happy news for Mrs. Pemfrey. She started to bring round fresh eggs, 2 dozen at a time, to build up Tricky's strength. Now, in order to get back Tricky's strength, Mrs. Pemfrey started to bring round fresh eggs, say about 2 dozens at a time. For a happy period, my partners and I had 2 eggs each for breakfast. But when the bottle of wine began to arrive, the real possibilities of situation began to dawn on the household. Began to dawn here means realized. Now, when there were perfect happiness, doctor along with his partner, they had 2 eggs each for breakfast. But along with the bottle of wine, right, there was real possibility that they might have some more amount of eggs. Okay. Now the situation began to dawn means situation began to realize on the household when Tricky would arrive here, it will be kept on a nourishing diet. It was to enrich Tricky's blood. Lunch became a ceremonial occasion with 2 glasses of wine before and several during the meal. It was to enrich Tricky's blood. Now Mrs. Benfrey was very much worried. She wanted to get back all the strength that was lost by Tricky. Now, when Tricky was having lunch, it was a sort of ceremonial occasion. 2 glasses of wine, along with 2 glasses of wine, before and several during the meal, was given to that Pat. We could hardly believe it when the brandy came to put a final edge on Tricky's constitution. When some drinks were given to Tricky in order to boost up its health, it was according to the nourishing intake that was supposed to be given by Mrs. Benfrey. For a few nights, the fine spirit was rolled around, inhaled, and reverently drunk. Okay, inhaled means breathe in, and reverently means respectfully. For a few nights, the fine spirit was rolled around. When all these things were given to Tricky, for few nights, that dog kept on improving its health. He started rolling around and he started breathing in a respectful manner. Okay. And he started, after taking drinks, the health of Tricky was going to boost up. There were days of deep content, starting well, with the extra eggs in the morning, improved and sustained by the midday wine, finishing luxurious round the fire with the brandy. Now, when Tricky was going to boost up its health, it was the days of deep content. All and doctor along with Mrs. Benfrey, they were all satisfied. Now Tricky was just developing a good health when some extra eggs were given to him in the morning, and his diet was improved, and the process of giving midday wine also continued by the caretakers. Finish now later on during lunch time when some intoxication in the form of wine were given, right? Here the fine taste of brandy was liked by Tricky, and ultimately he was developing a good health. So this is all about my third lecture. This chapter will be completed. One more lecture is to be required.